Hello, everyone, and welcome to the IATA Technical Operation webinar. We're happy to have you here. Before we start, I would like to give you some information on logistics. This session is recorded. Your microphone is automatically muted. On the right side of your screen, you will be able to post your answer for the polls that we will have during the webinar. We will ask you 2 questions. For the question that you have for our panelists today, you can submit your question by selecting all panelists, not individuals, please. And you'll be able to see your own questions, and the questions will be visible once they're answered. Without further ado, I'm going to pass the microphone to Stuart Fox.
Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us for this webinar. We've run a series of these in IATA aimed at supporting the industry. So my name is Stuart Fox, Director of Flight Operations based at IATA in Montreal, and I head up a team of specialists, which includes everything from licensing and training, aircraft maintenance and airworthiness. We're committed to supporting the industry through this crisis and for the restart, which we're going to discuss here today. Just casting my mind back, and it seems like a long time ago, but actually it was in March when it seemed to be like almost every minute we were receiving NOTAMs or notices with airspace closing as the lockdown started. Some aircraft had to turn back, divert, and leaving vital supply chains broken. This reminded me of a similar situation I faced when I was an airline pilot on September 11th, 2001, and myself was stranded. We have mobilized all efforts and are very grateful for our support from ICAO for setting up short notice and lots of panel meetings, aiming to facilitate states granting the various alleviations safely, and for the collaboration with the OEMs, ICC, AIA, and for the regulators, for example, for almost daily meetings to help solve the various issues that the industry has faced. Particularly, I can cite one very good example of collaboration, which was the facilitating the transport of cargo in the passenger aircraft. Thank you for changing the slide, Chris. So putting it into context, pre-COVID, the aircraft utilization was 9 hours a day on average back in February. This then slipped to 5 hours a day, and the result was 18,000 aircraft parked up, and that is in April. This represented 65% of the fleet grounded. Things are picking up a little now, with the global average utilization now increased a little bit to 6 hours a day and roughly 15,800 aircraft still grounded. So gradually things are picking up, hence the reason we've got this webinar today to discuss restart. So I'd like to hand over to Chris to discuss the agenda and move on with the rich conversations. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart, and welcome you all. Let's start. First of all, I would like to introduce you to Daniel Canter, our antitrust counsel, who will be screening the questions in case there are some issues. I will introduce our speakers for the day, and then we'll address matters about preparing the aircraft for back into service, to return into service. We'll address various maintenance-related issues for the aircraft that are currently parked and stored, and also what are the issues with bringing those aircraft back to service slowly and when the markets are opening up. And we will address some specific issues about transporting cargo in passenger aircraft. As mentioned by Geraldine earlier, we'll have a couple of polls, and we will also have a Q&A session in the last 20 minutes of our discussion. And if I can have the next slide, please. Let me very briefly introduce our panelists. Myself, I'm the head of operational cost management at IATA. I've been working at IATA for about 14 years, worked at Delta before. I'm responsible for technical operations related issues for the airlines, for MROs, everything that has to do with engineering and maintenance, and also leasing activities. Also, I'm working on how we can digitize and transform the industry in a program, what we call it, Digital Aircraft Operations. Then we will have Jeff Phipps. He's the Chief Operational Airworthiness for Transport Canada, Civil Aviation, TCCA. Jeff has been instrumental with the Airworthiness panel at ICAO, and you will see from their activities how they have been able to help the airlines move on in these difficult times under the areas of in his jurisdiction. We will have Gilles de Cevins. He's the VP of Maintenance Programs and Services with Airbus Customer Services. Gilles has been working with us along with other OEMs in providing relief for the industry. He will get into the details on how we do that. And he has been also the Airbus representative to IATA's Engineering and Maintenance Group. We'll have Richard Hough. He's the Chief Technical Officer for Engine Lease Finance Corporation. He has been working from that position, and he's an expert in engine maintenance, engine leases. We hear from him all the aspects that are related and issues related to leasing activities. And then we have a couple of our experts in the airline, from the airline side. We have Swaran Sidhu. He's the head of Fleet Technical Management and easyJet, one of the most prominent low-cost carriers around the world with operations in Europe. And then finally, we'll have Sonny from Delta TechOps. He's the VP for Sales and Customer Service at Delta. He's really an expert, and he will talk to us about issues affecting the airline, one of the major legacy international network carriers, and also an MRO provider. So he will give us another perspective. And if I can have the next slide. So at IATA, we are working on how we can restart the industry. And we have split this activity into two major buckets. One is how we can restart the system, and the other is how we can restart the demand in the industry. In the system capabilities, and this is the area that mostly we are working on, we are addressing issues with slots, with licensing, and when I'm saying slots, maintenance related activities, licensing, the certification, levels of staffing, airworthiness related issues, insurance, and also matters related to the supply chain, including suppliers, OEMs, leasing companies, that they are an integral part of this industry. With respect to travel experience, how we can ensure that and take the necessary precautions to avoid the spread of the virus into our aircraft. And then on the demand is about restoring confidence, working with the governments, and ensure that passengers are confident to resume air flight. And finally, stimulating demand through various financial objectives, cost reductions, stimulus packages, working with governments to ensure that travelers, that passengers will coming back, it will be affordable for them, and we can get them on the aircraft. And if I can have the next slide, please. So we have 4 phases on this. One is immediate, what is happening on at IATA right now. We're trying to develop and put in place various manuals, guidances. You may have seen some of those. They are all in our IATA website, and you will see the links and a number of links at the end of the presentation that will be provided to you, and providing various procedures that they will need to be in place to enable the restart of the industry. On a short term, we are looking at a manual restart. We are looking at networks and schedules start developing from a regional perspective. There will be some minimum measures in place. It will be ad hoc. Nothing will be automated or normalized at that level. And that is basically to enable governments to approve these flights at that basic level. On a medium term, we will have some temporary but systematic operations, and we see we will have temporary arrangements in place supported by various SOPs, and then consistent application and mutual acceptance among the various governments that need to be involved to allow those flights to take place. And long term, it's what we call returning to business as usual, that currently we see that it will happen maybe after 18 months, about 18 months. We hope that the vaccine will be in place and people will have been using it, and that will lead also to a removal of temporary measures. So with this, I would like to pass on to our first, to have our first poll. And if we can have the first poll, so you can see the poll on your right. We're trying to get the pulse of the industry. When the demands of the industry, when do you believe that the demand for air travel will be back to 2019 levels? And the choices are A, 6 to 12 months, B, 12 to 24 months, C, 2 to 3 years, and D, in more than 3 years. So I will encourage you to vote in what do you believe it will be the best, and submit your answers by pressing the submit button, and then we'll see the results in a few seconds on the screen. This is for us an indication of where do we see that the industry will be recovering. So in a few seconds, we'll see the results. I hope all of you had the opportunity to vote on this. And let's have the results. So as you can see, the results are about 33% are looking at 2 to 3 years. So that was kind of the most popular answer. Some people elected not to answer, but actually it's been closely followed by about 26% of people who see that it will be 12 to 24 months to recover back at the 2019 levels. So with this, I would like to pass the microphone to Jeff Phipps with Transport Canada Civil Aviation, TCCA. And Jeff, it's all yours. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I'd like to start off by hoping that everyone online is staying safe and that you and your families are staying healthy. It's a very challenging time, and to state that is really an understatement. I'm going to go through just a few of the initiatives Transport Canada has put together to help our stakeholders and our certificate holders. If we could go to the next slide. When the outbreak started in Canada, our offices closed essentially in the second week of March, and everyone's been working at home since, and our offices today still remain closed. So from an operational airworthiness perspective, we realized we had to put a lot of measures in place to address the fact that our offices are closed, and address the fact that we are going to have, for example, aircraft maintenance engineers who are going to have expired licenses, and we're going to have aircraft that require maintenance. One of the first things we did in my group in operational airworthiness, we developed an exemption, NCR 29-2020. This exemption allows the AME to continue to use their license for a period of 6 months, even if their license has expired, because it's going to be very difficult to renew their license. This is an administrative procedure for our renewal, so there was absolutely zero impact on safety. We then realized from an aircraft maintenance point of view, our commercial air operators, although a lot of them are in a reduced operational role, to say the least, we also have maintenance coming due. And with the lack of available personnel and maintenance organizations actually shutting down, we used the provisions within our regulatory framework to issue a deviation for all commercial operators on their approved maintenance schedules. And essentially, the operators apply to Transport Canada, request the deviation, which is 30%. It does not apply to airworthiness limitations, CMRs, or ADs, but it does apply to the scheduled maintenance. It's a temporary measure that doesn't eliminate maintenance, but it's going to defer it by a percentage of 30%. We then had a large fleet of aircraft in the US, commercial aircraft. We issued IPB 2020-03, and this enabled some of our operators, commercial operators in the US, who were using 145 repair stations, who may have closed down or may have required a new repair station to perform maintenance on their aircraft. Currently, with our agreement with the FAA, those repair stations require a FAA-approved supplement. We had many operators who were seeking the services of a 145 repair station who did not have a supplement, so we put an interim policy in place not requiring the supplement, which was agreed to with the FAA. The next item is surveillance. IPB 2020-04 officially suspended surveillance activities on all our certificate holders as the initial measure, considering our offices were closed and with the provincial and federal guidelines for social distancing, etc., we were unable to perform on-site surveillance. The next item is IPB 2020-07. This is changes to the AME license renewal process. And prior to COVID-19 outbreak in Canada, we were not fully automated for a lot of our licensing or renewal processes or application processes. This IPB essentially enabled our AMEs to apply for a license renewal online, fully automated. And this is something that will also help with the backlog of license holders who are expired, who have not renewed until later this year. You can do it online now. You do not have to go into a Transport Canada Center or regional office. If we could have the next slide. The next item was the application process actually for the AME license. So we have a lot of AMEs who have applied, ready to apply, or are in the process of submitting supporting technical data. Again, we were in a traditional role of presenting original documentation to our offices. Considering everyone's closed, we put in procedures to now allow all documentation to be submitted electronically, which is a real benefit to our AMEs. The next item is IPB 2020-09. This is conducting on-site activities. So once we've suspended our surveillance activity, we've now put in new procedures to actually conduct on-site reviews. So although the on-site portion is suspended, we're doing the desktop reviews in accordance with IPB 2020-09, where we're still in contact with our certificate holders. We're reviewing their technical records, quality assurance results, etc., and performing our surveillance activities through a desktop procedure. This is very much in line with the QRG, the Quick Reference Guide that was developed by ICAO, and this is where the Airworthiness panel from ICAO played a very important role in developing that QRG for the ICAO members. The next item is IPB 2020-10. This IPB is talking about our certificate holders, for example, our aircraft or our approved maintenance organizations, our manufacturers, our air operators, our flight training units. Many of these organizations had their senior executives actually put on furlough, where they were not able to, they were trying to reduce overhead costs. We've acknowledged that the accountable executive may not be present in some of these certificate holders, although if we have our technical staff still in place, our chief pilots, our people responsible for maintenance control. We would not take certificate action as we consider this not to be a direct impact on safety. The last item is a civil aviation safety alert that we issued. And this is all about carrying cargo in the passenger compartment only for our CAR 705 air operators. And obviously, with the reduction in passengers, many operators were trying to reutilize some of their aircraft to carry cargo. We were able to issue this CASA without an exemption. The CASA has very detailed procedures and actions for the operator to take in regard to loading, dangerous goods, airworthiness aspects. They are to submit a compliance plan in accordance with the CASA to their PMI and based on the acceptable procedures in place and the respectable limits of loading for the seats and restraint systems, no exemption was required. However, if our operators are reconfiguring the cabin, removing seats, putting in cargo restraints, that's when we're going down the STC route. And Chris, that's all I had for today.
Thank you very much, Jeff. And with this, I'll turn it over to Gilles from Airbus. Jeff, I'm sorry, Gilles, or yours.
Thank you, Chris, and hello to everyone. So Gilles de Cevins, Head of Maintenance Program and Services in Airbus. And what I want to say first is that I'm not just talking for Airbus, but for all other OEMs as well, who basically have conducted similar activities to support airlines operations during the crisis, and of course to continue this support. So the first priority was really when all of you started to massively ground your airplanes in a mode that was unknown to the industry. So the first priority was basically reducing the maintenance burden for parked aircraft. So what type of task do you have to conduct during grounding? Basically, either it's AMM tasks, which are for, let's say, parking, that's the Airbus terminology, or active storage, that's the Boeing terminology, or long-term storage, prolonged storage. And on top, MPD tasks, which are calendar-driven and which do not stop, basically, during the grounding. So for all these tasks, we OEMs were able to provide justification and push to the right the maximum of the task in order for you to just be able to conduct those tasks during the grounding. And the first example was this 7 days periodic check along with the parking procedure, which was postponed to 15 days very early in our process, which basically divided your effort by a factor 2, and many other tasks and activities could be postponed, of course, with the support of the authorities, as Jeff mentioned before. This is still ongoing. We still get some requests to postpone some tasks, and this effort is continuing. And as Jeff mentioned, all of this was performed by our team from home. The next topic is supporting return to service. So that's a little bit more in anticipation, because if some of you have started to refly a bit, it's still massively in front of us. So what you seem to expect the most from us OEM and from IATA and other entities is to publish best practices, recommendation, checklist of what needs to be done prior to return an airplane in operation. So we are, of course, working on this. We will continue to cover deviations to the maintenance tasks that you may not have been able to perform for whatever reason. We will support ferry flights whenever your airplane needs to be ferried back to where you will operate it. And on top of this, we are in the course of anticipating whatever you will find on your airplane, system issues, corrosion, and along with this, make sure that parts, equipment, tools are available prior to return to service. And that's really an activity that is new even for us OEM, and we are putting in place a specific organization, specific task force with all the contributors from material, flight ops, and all the contributors in order to support this activity. Along with this, and in parallel with this, as Jeff mentioned, we have worked quite intensively also on transporting cargo in PAX area. So basically, OEMs, we have developed solutions, either with the seats remaining in the cabin or without the seats, either by providing just recommendation, technical support to exemptions that you got from your local authorities, or a more permanent solution through STCs or even service bulletins. So that's really the priority topics we have conducted. And I will just mention on top of this our initiative, which echoes what Chris said, restarting the demand. We also have in Airbus an initiative called Keep Trust in Air Travel, which is more around communication of airflow in the cabin and the safety of the passenger aspects. And I'm sure that you have already seen in the press some of those recommendations and communication. That's it for me, and I'm ready to answer some of your questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Gilles. And with this, I'll pass it on to Richard from ELFC. Richard, or yours?
Thanks, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here. To give you a perspective from the leasing community, it's really two focuses. One is existing customer and asset management. Firstly, in relation to deferral requests, we're no different than is widely reported in the industry. The vast majority of our customers need some forbearance of payments, and along with that, future fleet needs, they cannot yet be clarified. But we know that for the next 2 to 5+ years, their fleet needs will be smaller. So we're working with customers on their initial plans for that, but plans are very initial and only initial at this stage. We're looking to provide flexibility and preparing for the turnaround here. Where we can, we look at run-out engine returns and engine exchanges to avoid shop visits and the big cash outlays that are involved there, along with the asset downtime. I know I speak from an engine lessor perspective, but I know from the aircraft lessor side that if it's appropriate to take back an aircraft with upcoming aircraft heavy maintenance or engine refurbishment, they'll also consider it. It's important for them to maintain liquidity as well and also provide flexibility in that regard. The most significant challenge at the moment is capacity and portability of technical inspectors and engineers. They're in short supply. Obviously, health considerations for international travel is in question, dealing with a number of simultaneous bankruptcy scenarios, and we haven't seen the worst of this yet, I don't believe. Which all means we're trying to get assets back, prep them for storage, and then store them at a suitable location. We roll out the normal playbook for managing repossessions, redelivery, but manage these much bigger challenges regarding difficulty of getting people moved, difficulty getting engines from our perspective moved. For aircraft is very difficult at the moment. And prices are much more expensive than they were just 6 months ago. It's obvious as a result of the market. But the is more difficult. Moving to new business and marketing. The for is to have liquidity for acquisitions. And in ELF, we're very fortunate in that we have funds. We're in the market and we're looking to buy assets with the opportunities. We see the demand for green time engines increase next year, but so will supply. The strategic placement of assets and the ability to deliver quickly, mainly through a streamlined approval process, is paramount to being ready to be able to deliver. From an aircraft perspective, aircraft will be parked, they'll be mothballed as much as they can, but they'll have to return to service if there's a quick uptake in the market. From parts perspective, and we have to look at parts material in relation to engine MRO as well. As many people will be aware, we are in this space a few years back with investment in INAV LLC. What we're doing is we're processing engines and processing the refurbishment of key materials, long lead time, anticipation for the demand for US material, used serviceable material, which will pick up next year. We'll try to minimize the cash out in shop visits as well by using used material rather than new. But the biggest thing here is the context. What we're all seeing is the biggest downturn that the industry has ever faced. But also the speed of this downturn is unprecedented. And the driver of this, giving rise to the speed of it, is this virus. And this virus doesn't yet allow us to make any reliable forecasts for the recovery. The potential future waves, uncertainty in time, vaccine, and the effectiveness of mitigation practices to be employed. So therefore, the overriding element here is this is a knife that's still falling in our industry. So we're looking at trying to keep a scanned view on everything that could happen with its very open as to the possibilities at the moment. And that's pretty much it in summary, Chris.
Thank you very much, Richard. Apologies for some technical difficulties on the sound, but we'll move on with Swaran, that will be talking about experiences from easyJet. Swaran, all yours.
Thank you, Chris, and hello to everyone, and good afternoon from the UK. So today I'm going to be talking about some of the maintenance challenges that's been faced by the industry, particularly during this pandemic, when there have been mass parking of aircraft, all over the world, really. And I'm sure that many people who've joined this webinar are very familiar with these problems that they'll probably be able to relate to it as well. So some of the things that you can see on the screen there in terms of the maintenance challenges. So, it's trying to maintain your cost, and ensuring safety, and you are then trying to work through these challenges to ensure that you get where you want to be. And one of those was parking definitions and a decision point at which you were going to park the aircraft with the kind of moving feed of these virus. And there came a decision point where, the airline decides to ground the entire fleet, and you find yourself breached in terms of your parking requirements, because the aircraft were parked in some cases well before the decision point of parking took place. And then, of course, the challenges were with the aircraft locations, ensuring that your aircraft were all parked in the right locations where you could seek, the proper spot that you need, and you're ensuring that those locations are manageable, and the airport charges were equally reasonable. And followed by that were, of course, our documentation challenges with the AMM, and it was kind of interpreting the AMM requirements, what they were actually saying. And this was an uncharted territory for many people, and trying to understand the requirements of the work that was being asked, and then seeking deviations from the OEM in terms of kind of TAs from Airbus, for example, and where Gilles mentioned earlier in his conversation that they were supporting airlines, and we certainly sought that support. And in between all this, you have to kind of consider how you were going to manage this entire volume of parking, and we had to kind of form a team that was going to be coordinating the entire planning of these parking requirements. And this was kind of a big challenge as well amongst the teams that that you've really furloughed staff, and you're trying to utilize the existing team to overcome this problem. And in there, of course, one of the big challenges was the parts and tooling, including logistics requirement. We were trying to make sure that we had the flow of parts at the right time, right place, and without having to incur huge costs. And in between that, you have to kind of review your suppliers, your partners in it who are contracted with you on a flight hour rate. And that became a challenge for them with the aircraft being parked with no kind of income coming in for the supply of those services. So it's a balance you have to strike to ensure that your partner was continuing to supply the flow of parts where you required them. And the other challenges, of course, were the logistics, where you were not able to maximize the transport yield in terms of that big transport trucks were required to transport parts across the network. And this is mainly due to non-availability of hotels that the drivers could stay in, so they were utilizing their trucks to kind of utilize that as accommodation for themselves, and equally to protect themselves against the virus. So you were having to pay quite a sum of money to transport small amount of parts. And then the MRO availability and support, one of the key things in there. I mean, equally, the MROs were not immune to these viruses. They had also furloughed staff, and they was trying to strike the right balance against the contractual terms you had with the existing MRO suppliers. Behind all that, of course, we had to carve out a planning strategy to ensure that you were able to get the aircraft safely and in a cost-effective way, both in a part condition in terms of maintenance requirements, and then subsequently preparing them for flight once they were going to return back to revenue service. And of course, then it was the execution of the actual maintenance requirements from the parking, and this was the kind of ensuring that the KMO instructions for the 145 organizations were clearly understood, and they were correctly executed. that was a challenge there in terms of interpretation of work requirements. So it was a case of kind of really simplifying steps, for the engineers to ensure A, that they're doing the right piece of work, and B, you were not kind of setting them up to fail in terms of human factors. So next slide, please. And of course, in amongst all this is your kind of thinking behind the maintenance itself. I mean, as we always constantly do, cost is a big driver. You have to look at your maintenance in a very smart way, and using your planning strategy, ensure you carve out your plan to deliver the requirements of your planning and return to kind of service of the aircraft, and making sure that you're balancing the sphere of safety against the costs that you're going to incur when you're going to put them up in the air. And the other challenge that we certainly kind of experienced was, as soon as the virus kind of pandemic was announced and the fleet was grounded, the offices were kind of locked down, and there was remote working taking place. So there were some communication challenges in the beginning, and slowly but surely we overcame those, and it kind of became BAU to a degree. But then, of course, there was a challenge of a KMO department that was split, working from home in various places, and getting them ready again to be effective enough to start getting them ready to get the aircraft back in the air again. And another challenge that we also saw was the availability of services. When I mean services, these are third-party services that, for example, you have hydraulic, oil, water sampling, etc. And some of these labs in some of our areas of network were closed, and this was a challenge in trying to kind of meet your requirements and against those services that were not available. And of course, there was the OEM and the competent authority support that we required. And I must say that this has been a pretty interesting period during which it was a learning kind of point for everyone, because as far as I'm concerned, we were all in this together, and it was kind of working through these challenges with the authorities. And I must say that both Airbus, our manufacturer, and our competent authority were quite helpful in some cases. No doubt there were challenges in there as well. I mean, there were some interesting debates going on in some of the interpretations of the documentation and the requirements. And of course, there was the maintenance planning document versus the parking requirements. And again, Gilles mentioned earlier that these are some of the help the authorities, the OEM was giving us in terms of what you could or could not do. And of course, with the aircraft park, the calendar requirements were still there. Those had to be completed, but you have to plan that carefully against your parking requirements. And I know there was an Airbus document that came out, but you have to kind of review that very carefully to see whether that suits your requirements in terms of how you could plan out your future maintenance requirements. And then finally, of course, the risk assessment of parking in itself. And you have to definitely look at your entire network in terms of where the aircraft will park, what were your key risks that you would be facing, and how would you mitigate those risks, both during, when the aircraft will park. And when I say risk, this is the risk not just in terms of airworthiness, this is risk both for, safety of your employees, the MROs who are doing the work, your employees who are coming into work, keeping them safe. And of course, finally, returning the aircraft back into service as well. Now, returning the aircraft back into service, is a particular challenge as well for a large fleet like ours. And for example, there's a requirement in AMM Chapter 10 that to have the aircraft returning to service, it's got to be done within 24 hours. And that's a pretty hard challenge, when you have a massive fleet that's, parked in different stations, you're trying to get that ready to match your requirements when the airline is kind of ready for operational service again. So all in all, it was not only a kind of a learning curve for us and a lot learned from this, but some interesting challenges in there. So, and thank you for listening. I'll be ready to take questions again later.
Thank you, Swaran. And Sonny, your turn. Thank you.
Great. Good day to everybody. Happy to be here. I wanted to speak from a Delta TechOps perspective and just give you a little bit of a look under the hood. So we, like the Delta family, are just trying to figure out how this all works and how our organization will work going into the future. Well, today and going into the future, as we all face worldwide this pandemic. One thing that is most important to us is our customers, and and our employees. They remain top priority. So we've got to figure out ways to keep everybody satisfied, safe, and employed if possible. So in the MRO, the area that I'm speaking of, we do remain busy. We do have surprisingly a fair amount of work for cargo operators and some other work that has continued to come in. Although we do face some big challenges with regard to the pandemic. Some of the challenges that we face are social separation. As an airline, like most airlines around the world with our really reduced cash flows or almost no cash flows, have had to figure out ways to cut costs. So we've asked for our employees to take leaves of absences. And these issues have faced some challenges for us with regard to production of engines and components and other work that we do. And with the employees and our customers in mind, we're just doing everything we can to review outside work, what we do outside, what we do inside, with the goal of keeping our TechOps workforce as robust and as large as possible. Next slide, please, Geraldine. So having said that, we've done some things with our subsidiary Delta Flight Products, Delta TechOps and Delta Flight Products. When the pandemic first hit, as was stated earlier in some of the presentations, the worldwide fleets flying really diminished. I think we were down as an airline to, at one point in time, about 2% of the passengers flying as compared to the year prior. So we've had to figure out with our 11,000 TechOps employees, what do we do? What do we do with people? People can't all take time off. They can't all afford to leave. We can't lay people off. So we went out on a mission to try to find things that could keep the team busy. We produced some PPE. We did some other things. As an example, we got into designing and building face shields for hospitals and for our airline employees. And we also built these safety barriers for, as you see in grocery stores, and hopefully you'll see soon in the lobbies of the airports that you go into and at the gates, these shields. We've really tried to take and utilize our technical capabilities, our machine shops, our employees, our engineering expertise to keep everybody busy as much as possible. One of the interesting things that I wanted to talk to and just let you know what we did, the United States Air Force actually came out through what they call their other transactional authority group and wanted to create a pod that would transport military troops, U.S. military troops, or other troops around the world on C-17 aircraft from countries back to the U.S. And so a project came out where they said, we want to use one of these ISO containers, the steel containers that you see go onto the back of ships. They said they wanted to turn it into a patient room in a negative pressure environment. And the interesting part in this unprecedented time, unprecedented things happen. And so what we did was we found out about this opportunity, we bid on it, we won it, we designed it, and we delivered this pod in 23 days. So it just is a testament that the world can come together and organizations can come together in these hard times and really accomplish super things. And that's what we continue to do at Delta and continue to try and will continue to try to do for many months and years to come. Thank you. That's all I've got, Chris.
Thank you, Sonny. Before we go to the Q&A, and we have received a number of questions so far, I would like to proceed with our second poll, and we'll give you a minute to do this. What is your main maintenance-related issue preparing for return to service? A, coping with regulatory and OEM maintenance requirements. B, availability of tools, facilities for heavy maintenance. C, availability of technical staff. And D, aircraft cleaning requirements to meet turnaround times at the gate. So you have a few seconds to check one of the answers. They appear on your screen right now. And please don't forget to hit the submit button so we can see the responses from you. A few seconds left. and let's get the answers. So the most popular one, 40%, is coping with regulatory OEM maintenance requirements, followed closely by availability of technical staff and also meeting the cleaning requirements. So thank you for your answers. Let me proceed with the first question, which is kind of a general theme from what I see in the questions. There are a few people who have been asking this, and I will address this to Jeff from TCCA. Jeff, how long do you expect these interim measures to remain in force for? And what are the long-term impacts on regular maintenance and airworthiness on the aircraft? And maybe also, Gilles, after Jeff's response, maybe you can take on this. It's a very popular question, actually. Go ahead, Jeff.
Thanks, Chris. I actually like the question a lot because in the operational airworthiness responsibilities, we put out a lot of interim measures. Some of these measures will only be in place during the actual COVID-19 pandemic. However, many of the measures are going to remain in place and probably be renewed. And one of the things we found out, some of our interim measures are actually better explaining some of our regulatory requirements where maybe some of our guidance was outdated, or maybe we didn't have enough guidance in some of the subjects. So a great example is the deviations on scheduled maintenance. Although we have the provisions in our cars, our interim process bulletin really identifies some of the approach to be used to obtain a deviation. And some of our guidance, our main guidance, is a little outdated and it needs to be renewed. So some of these interim procedures and policies will be renewed, and a lot of them will actually become new guidance and permanent guidance in the future.
You want also to take a crack on it, please?
Yeah, and I would back up this position. Collectively, we have all learned a lot during this crisis. We have made extra fast analysis and development, come up with justification to push some of those tasks. So we have the material. Yes, sometimes the material was there only on the condition that this was temporary, that this was one time. But many topics that we are able to provide can actually become permanent. So yes, there will be a time when we will consider inserting some of those changes into our AMM, so that we don't even have to think again the next time. Some others we will have the documentation, the rationale, and when we are faced with new situation like this, it will be even faster to provide similar relaxations. So yeah, I think we have all made progress.
Thank you both. Again, it's related to you both, but probably Jeff, with grounding of the entire fleet, which is unprecedented by operators and AMOs as an activity, would that consider to be a safety risk for huge number of aircraft preservations and again for the return back to service?
So I can obviously only answer from a Canadian perspective. We in Transport Canada are not perceiving a fleet grounding as a potential safety risk. We have a lot of confidence in our approved maintenance schedules, our approved maintenance organizations, our operators, and our aircraft maintenance engineers. We also are relying heavily on the fact that our operators will be coordinating with our OEMs for additional maintenance and or procedures to help get aircraft back in the air after a long-term storage. I would like to point out, however, and again, it goes in line with some of the lessons learned, this is going to be a topic of discussion at the International MRB Policy Board, which I have been involved with for almost 25 years. And we will be discussing storage return to service procedures in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, and we'll be working with the OEMs to talk about this issue on an international level and probably make some of our requirements a little bit more robust, but also provide a little bit more clarity on when do you need to go talk to an OEM and allow the OEM to provide that necessary information.
Thank you, Jeff. Gilles, anything more to add?
Risk on safety, airworthiness. I would say, in theory, no, if all the guidelines are followed and you know the process to return to service is followed. But well, we need to be a bit careful. We need to monitor this situation because yes, the grounding is massive. Aircraft are grounded all over the place. So there will be sometimes some case-by-case analysis, and I trust that airlines will ask the question before flying, basically, to us, and we will analyze all the potential situations. So we need to get ready to be in this analysis mode, so that whatever new situation is carefully analyzed.
Thank you both. One question for Richard. When do you foresee the massive lease returns to start, and what, in your opinion, will be the main challenge with early or massive lease returns?
Difficult question, Chris. Can you hear me better now? I know my sound had some issue a short while ago.
Yeah, there are some issues. A bit better. Go ahead.
Okay. I'll try and be brief. When does it start? It has started, but I wouldn't call it massive as yet because airlines are still, you know, they've got staff that they've all been parked to their aircraft. What I anticipate is two things happening. You're going to see a number of airlines that default. We've seen bankruptcy positions that are in place, and those assets are going to come back. How many and how quick? Well, it depends on how long that process goes on. But I think Q3, Q4 this year, you're going to see a lot of it as people look towards their winters and make decisions in that regard. Aside from that, you're going to see, I think, you're going to see a lack of lease extensions, and I think you're going to see a lot of engine assets that come on that flow. A lot of the leased engines now are on short-term basis, certainly a lot more than would have been in place in the last downturn of 2008. So I think you'll see that you'll find a lot of engines off lease in the next 12 months, and thereafter it will roll out to being the normal lease end of those assets. For us, you know, our portfolio goes out to 2030, 2031, so hopefully those airlines that may go through, you know, we don't anticipate any of those assets coming back, but I think there's going to be a lot of stuff parked for the next 12, 18 months, and where assets can be given back, they will, and 20% of the, or 30% of the engines globally leased that are on program for less than 12 or 18 months, and probably most of them will come back.
Thank you, Richard. We still had some issues with your voice, but I hope people got the message. The next question will be for probably Gilles first, and also from Sonny from an MRO perspective. How do you see the warranty period on the aircraft and the components due to the grounding in such pandemic situation?
A bit difficult. Maybe I would pass on to Sonny first, and I could give my view afterwards.
And if it's something that you have to work on a case by case, please say so. I just want to see.
Chris, I think it really is on a case by case basis, and for me, it would be more from the OEM, and I'll just use the A220 as an example. A220 new aircraft into service, components as one example of warranty issues or warranty items that could come up. I suspect the OEMs won't extend that warranty period for the aircraft being on the ground. That's my personal opinion. I can't say that on behalf of Delta or anybody else, but I can't imagine they would. So I don't see that the parking of aircraft or the pandemic being affecting the warranty periods of parts or aircraft.
Gilles, you want to add?
Yeah, I would back this up maybe on some components which almost by nature do not degrade over time, why not? But again, case by case basis. For some other components, for which the time is a concern, the conditions, the humidity, take the tires for example. This might degrade even if it's not used, and sometimes it degrades more because it is not used. So again, case by case and different situation depending on the type of equipment.
Thank you both. Swaran, a question that would apply, I think, to you. You have been a proponent and you spoke many times on digitizing the industry. How do you see now with this pandemic and working from remotely? How do you see this having an effect in the industry? And from your perspective, and will airlines look at it more favorably right now?
Well, I think that would be the right thing to do, Chris. We've gone digital for quite some time now, both in terms of how we manage our records and particularly e-sign. And I've been talking about the entire industry. If you take the MRO shops and if you take, let's say, the regulatory certificates, I mean, a lot of those has yet got to be in a digital age yet. So, for example, your Form 1s, they're still not digitalized yet, or the documents, the repair work behind it, where you could access, real time your documentation as to what's been done on your components. So I think the industry should take this opportunity to look at that. And then, I mean, in some cases there have been some movement, where some authorities are starting to accept, the electronic ARC certificates on board, for example, or CFAs. But yet there are some to really kind of accept that. I think it's a case of mindset in understanding, particularly during this pandemic, that where you could not physically send some documents. Now was the time to really accept the digital solution as the way to go forward.
Okay, thank you very much. And one more question for Sonny. Do you see that the pandemic is kind of the activities around maintenance will be changing? Are you looking at bringing more in-house or outsourcing? How do you see that affecting the business model that you have right now in place at Delta?
Sure. Today, Chris, I mean, we've got a very robust and large TechOps organization, and I know that that's what we believe is one of our unique selling points or one of our benefits as an airline. And I think as a whole, we'd like to retain as much of that as possible. So we'll always continue to look at what we can bring in that we don't already do today, and how we continue to enhance our in-house capabilities. The challenge that I think all airlines face today, and what Swaran talked about just a moment ago with digital records, to me the challenge is going to be for all airlines in the future is cash to pay for these types of system upgrades from a technical perspective, IT perspective. For us, bringing in-house things that require capital investment, it's going to be a challenge for the industry for years to come, I believe, just because of the cash position we're all in right now, the cash crunch that we all face.
Thank you, Sonny. And I think we are running out of time. We would like to be on time on this. If we can have the next slide, please. So first of all, thank you to all of you that attended this webinar. I hope you found it useful. It will be posted. You will get a link to it. So you will get the slides and the whole webinar. And then on our, as I mentioned earlier, on our activities, on our website, you see the links there. You can find a lot of material, including our drafts on aircraft cleaning guidance. It's still a draft form, and we would like to welcome your inputs. And if we go to the next slide, please. Next page. we provided you with a couple of links, one from Transport Canada about the COVID-19 measures, and then there are some ICAO, the ICAO card, which is a very important document that the whole industry has subscribed to. It's called the card report and the takeoff guidance. Please take a look at it because it provides a universal global approach on how to restart the industry. And also for more specific safety and operational related measures, go to the other ICAO site where all these quick reference guides are posted, not only for maintenance, but for other parts of the operation. And with this, I would like to thank you all for attending the conference, and you will get a link in quite soon after the end of the webinar in the next couple of days or so. Thank you very much for attending. I'm sorry we didn't get through all the questions, but we'll try our best. Thank you, and thanks to all the panelists who devoted their precious time to participate in this. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chris.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you, guys. Bye.
Bye, Geraldine.